Good day, hello. I was gonna say good evening, but I'm like, it might not be the evening. And welcome to Nerd Rage, episode 185?
Is it? I think so.
I don't
I
care.
can't remember.
I don't care.
It'll be under the video. You'll see it.
Well, I mean, you'll probably see it before you even click on the video, so. So anyway, show. We're discussing
Yeah.
things today. Namely, the
We
topic of identity, right?
yes. Sort of broadly, that covers most things, I think. We this all came about because we were just chatting after doing a previous show, and then you said that would make a good topic for a later show. So
Here we are, without any sort of rubric or script or anything to get us actually going, and the
we
real
are completely
professional.
unscripted, but I think people like that because it does sort of feel like a more organic conversation that way.
It makes us sound like incompetent boobs.
Like I said, more organic. Um, okay, do you want to get like straight into identity? Do you want to talk about, because I asked you to watch Black Panther, I wanted your opinion on that.
Yes, and I did.
Um, or did you want to talk first about hirings and firings?
Hmm. Hmm. Man, I have no idea. Hirings and firings, I guess?
Okay. Um, well, hirings and firings. We've got James Gunn, who was fired because of his tweets coming out where it was really disturbing, um, and sort of uh, pedo content tweets. And then, of course, you had the hiring of the New York Times editorial, wasn't it? She was an editor.
Yes. I just realized I never
Um,
slid my microphone forward.
and she also has a history of some extremely racist tweets. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, it's racist against white people, so a lot of people will just forgive that.
Yeah, they'll just
You
hand wave it away as not really racist.
know. um, okay, so hirings and firings. I have already publicly said that I support the firing of James Gunn because I do not feel that Disney really had any other recourse.
Mm-hmm.
They're a children's media empire, and his content was, as I said, it was very pedophilic in nature. Now, you know, there, of course, and the fandom pages immediately, someone came out and said that this was a witch hunt, that it was some right winger who brought this up because they didn't like that James Gunn was speaking out against Trump. So, of course, they go digging into his past, and then that gave that sort of gave birth to the petition, which has now gotten lots of signatures that people want him to be rehired by Disney. Um, and so it it really became sort of a political thing
Mm-hmm.
as well as just a decency thing. Um, and of course, a lot of people on the right came out and were like, "Oh, this is ridiculous. It's free speech. People should be able to say what they want and not have to worry that a Twitter mob is going to come after them and blah blah blah." Um, I would say, of course they sort of have a point. I don't know exactly how relevant it is, given that this is, a private company and they can hire and fire, and it's not free speech when you're talking about action taken by anyone other than the government.
Right.
So I think we tend to throw a lot of stuff under the banner of free speech that doesn't actually fall under free speech. Like I said, the content was very odd and disturbing and just a little too on the nose. It's just oddly, weirdly specific. And
You're really liking these descriptive words here.
um, I'm freshly caffeinated. Thank you very much. But yeah, it's just, of course, you sort of also have that whole deal where he supported Roseanne's firing,
Mm-hmm.
and his justifications for that sort of come back on him now and his firing. So, it does sort of seem a bit poetic in that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Here's the thing about it, and as regards to it being a whole witch hunt sort of thing. Um, I'll tell you right now, there are some of those qualities in there as far as this is concerned, just because as we've pointed out, these are tweets from many years ago for the most part. Um, these are tweets from many years ago. These very off-color jokes, and it's like on the one hand, it's like, do we really want to live by those rules where we dredge things up from decades ago and use them to destroy people now? On the other hand, it's like we have that whole aspect of these are the rules that the left and the SJWs and everyone over there have created. We have to make them live by their rules to make them stop trying to implement those rules against us. However, all that being said, I don't know. Like, as far as this is concerned, in my opinion, there just has to be a line when it comes to the sorts of behaviors you engage in. They can't just you can't just let people get away with whatever just because it happened a decade ago or 2 decades ago or a century ago necessarily.
right.
There has to be a line. There has to be a line and so forth over regarding the kinds of things you do. And in this regard, I think that making quote unquote jokes that are very pedophilic in nature, that are pedocentric, is a line too far, especially for a company like Disney.
Right.
You can't have you can't have your directors, famous as they are, talented as they are, going around and doing that sort of thing and potentially tarnishing your company's image.
Exactly. And I know that a lot of people have made, the argument that, oh, worse things happen at Disney, but worse things are not in the news right now.
Yes.
So, they can only deal with, the sort of, um, the dumpster fire that's in front of them as
Yes.
far as their company is concerned. They can't deal with all of it. This is getting attention right now, and this is what people are going to judge them on. Um, and they still understand that their market, by and large, are the families that, they cater to with most of their movies and
Mm-hmm.
their theme parks and everything else. It's the children, but it's also the parents of the children. And the parents of the children aren't really going to turn a blind eye to them saying, oh, but, that was in the past and those pedophile jokes are just, he's not that way anymore. I don't think that parents are overwhelmingly forgiving of that sort of stuff.
Yes.
And, I've heard anything from 6 years to 10 years that this happened. 6 years is not terribly long ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not talking about, a lot of people say, oh, we all do and say stupid things in our youth. This was not a youthful indiscretion. He
Yeah,
was in his
he
40s
was
when
in
he
his
tweeted.
40s.
He was of an age that he knew very well what he was engaging in, and
Mm-hmm.
he knew what the sort of blowback and fallout would be from that. So I can't very well excuse it as a youthful indiscretion, that he just didn't understand his edgy humor was going to come back and bite him in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
He knew very well. That's why he did it.
Yep.
Sort of the whole shock jock thing. Um, they know what they're doing. So, then for them to have to answer for it whenever that answer occurs, I mean, like you said, there has to be a line, and for Disney, he went way over that line. Now there have been other writers, producers, whatever, from Rick and Morty.
Yes, I heard
They
about
have
that.
both made pedophilic content that I think goes way beyond what James Gunn tweeted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've actually depicted it either in a video of themselves with a doll or a cartoon that they did that was insanely disturbing. I mean, but the company that they work for did not fire them because they simply don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, it's too much. It's too far, and I don't want to have anything to do with anything that they have produced.
Right.
Um,
I mean, that was me before this point, but still.
yeah, but I mean, that would do it. That would definitely do it.
Right.
And I can't respect a company that would keep someone employed who did that.
Interesting. Anyway, sorry, I just got slightly distracted actually because XSplit had a big update a couple of days ago, and I just noticed a couple of features that weren't there before. I was like, oh, that's also new. Anyway, sorry, I did not mean to distract from that conversation at all.
You just got squirrely.
A little bit.
Um, okay, so you're right on the heels of all the James Gunn news, and quite frankly, I wish people would just stop with the petitions and oh my God, the fandom pages that are constantly posting about bring James Gunn back and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, Disney made a decision. Right now, if they took him back and reneged on that, it would sort of, it would just
It would
be
alienate a lot of people.
more drama and more controversy, and it, they would be dumb to do that. And I just don't think that Disney is that dumb. Um,
It's also kind of weird that all the people that like with all the people going, bring James Gunn back and everything too, like it comes at this sort of weird. I don't know if touchstone is the correct moment, but like this weird moment we're in where like pedophiles are trying to latch onto the LGBT movement.
uh-huh.
And it's just like the timing feels kind of weird almost in the fact that
It is really weird. And I have noticed that. I also noticed that a lot of the people that are very adamant about bringing him back and, letting people be forgiven for things that they've said in the past are deep into the resist movement because of things that Trump has said in the past.
Mhm.
It's really hypocritical in a lot of ways that they are absolutely 100% against someone who said something 11, 12 years ago as opposed to someone who tweeted something 6 or so years ago.
Yeah.
So, but I agree with you that there's got to be a standard. You can't just forgive everything, especially as a company when that person is representing you. I mean, personally, yes, you can forgive people, and I'm very happy that forgiveness exists and that we can all, become better versions of ourselves over time, and self-improvement is the thing. That's great. And I think personally, it is entirely possible to forgive people for things that they've said and done that were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But, if that person is representing like a larger group or a company, then you have to take things into account and you have to have a standard. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of what we'll discuss today, that there's got to be like a baseline somewhere that exists where this is okay and this isn't. Because what we see a lot in society now is just a lot of moral relativity. There are no standards. There are no absolutes. There's no like absolute good and absolute bad. It's just whatever we feel like today,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yep. Speaking of that Sarah Jeong character with the New York Times.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, apparently the New York Times doesn't care, what she said years ago, and I haven't read like what the justification was. Has she changed? Was it just her being edgy? Was it a youthful indiscretion? I have no idea. I don't know. Um,
I think
I
I think the basic defense was basically that she was being harassed online, quote unquote, and basically she just used that language to turn it around on people. But it's just like,
Yeah, that's weak.
People have dredged up tweets where it's like there's absolutely no context here that would otherwise justify it. So it's like, yeah,
No, it's just racist.
pretty much.
I do like how leftists try and use harassment as sort of a blanket excuse for whatever they do.
Yep.
You know, this person is harassing me, so I want to have them removed from this platform.
And it's always the vaguest definition of harassment too. You know, like
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's like, oh, you made me mildly uncomfortable. Oh, I disagreed with you. Oh, you exist.
It's usually a bit of back and forth. Like, you know, they'll say something, someone disagrees, they'll disagree more disagreement, blah blah blah. Stop talking to me, it's harassment. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, it's often it's brought on. Often they bring it on themselves. You know, and
which is funny because, you know, on social media you can block anyone if they're actually harassing you, just block them.
yep.
It seems to be a really easy solution to that problem on social media.
But hey, what do we know? But yes, it's all it's all very tiresome. But I think it actually does kind of tie in pretty neatly with going into talking about Black Panther a bit because there actually is because the reason this whole issue of identity and so forth came up actually is that I was just musing at random actually that I've noticed that over the years, as I've gotten a bit older, that I find that I kind of understand like identifying with particular racial groups, in particular, and other groups a little bit a little bit better, even better as time goes on, and like it's like I can kind of like it's like in a way I can kind of better identify with blackness as time goes on because, and for all intents and purposes, I really don't think of myself, for just to be perfectly frank, I don't really can think of myself as black per se, like I really
Yeah.
don't. In addition to being kind of light skinned, it's just not something that kind of resonates with me, and so I don't really think about it at all. And I most certainly I would say more closely identify with being white than with being black in a lot of ways, especially psychologically, if in that regard. And yet at the same time, I find that as time goes on, like I find that like I can better understand like blackness and people identifying that way, just because as I get more experienced and as I'm exposed to more things over the years, it kind of it kind of starts to like etch its way. It kind of tries to etch itself into my character and how I think and what I see and whatnot. So that's kind of where this topic came up, and oddly enough, watching Black Panther was actually a really good choice for kind of trying to understand this conversation, because as we all recall, when Black Panther first came out, there was this huge hype train over it
Yeah.
being a movie about a black superhero, and the first
Yeah.
black superhero movie, but
Really, predominantly black cast, black superhero, black villain, I mean, it was really marketed towards, you know, they didn't really have to market it towards, the white demographic, because they already had, Marvel fans and comic fans in the bag.
hmm
um, because it was released within that universe. So it was really marketed towards, I want to say, the black demographic. And yeah, so when we were having that conversation, I did want your opinion, and I still want to know what you think of the movie before I say what I thought of it.
the movie was definitely overrated compared to its hype train. Um, it's not an awful movie. It kept me entertained throughout it, but there was definitely like holes and flaws, and there's weird ideological stuff in there that I do want to talk about a bit, when we kind of get back, like after we talk about the movie for a bit. But generally speaking, yeah, the movie's clearly kind of got a flawed net. It definitely has like some noticeable narrative flaws in it that kind of just, they didn't take me out of the experience entirely, but I'm kind of just like, I'm not connecting with this on the level I should be.
Hmm.
I just thought it was like, I just felt like a little distracted while watching it from time to time. So that's definitely the
Um,
that's the gist of it anyway.
yeah. And see, okay, so while I was following all the fandom pages, I didn't go and see Black Panther in theaters because I have a limited number of movies that I can actually afford to go and see in theaters, and everything else I see when it comes out in DVD. Um,
Right.
so that one didn't make the cut as far as theater version. Um, so I had followed a lot of like the chatter back and forth about people getting really excited, and it was fun actually to see a lot of the black people who are like new fans to the MCU getting all decked out and cosplay and going to the
Mm-hmm.
theater. I thought that was fun. I
Yeah.
mean, as a nerd, it's always cool when like the tribe grows.
Yeah.
um but then there was that backlash where people started saying, this movie was overhyped," and then all of a sudden it's like, "You're a racist. You can't, you're only saying that because it's black cast and black hero and all this." And it's like, I don't know. So then I watched it like fully expecting, to the MCU experience for it to be, a really good movie and fun with, sort of a well-written script and well played characters and all of that. And I was let down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I did feel like it was overhyped. It was way overhyped. I'll be honest, it was like wildly overhyped.
Yeah.
um as far as pacing, it reminded me more of Captain America: The First Avenger, because it was so much time spent like building up this one character's story,
Mm-hmm.
um, and Captain America in a lot of ways made more sense because it was an earlier movie in the MCU.
Right.
And Black Panther has already, he's already been in at least one other movie. He was in Winter Soldier or Civil War, or both.
Civil War, I think.
Civil War. Um,
I mean, I didn't. I haven't watched Civil War yet. I think it was Civil War.
okay, yeah, it was Civil War. And he just seemed like such a badass character in that movie. And it turns out that he's, in Black Panther, like the movie about him, he's really kind of wishy-washy, and
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't seem to have like a really firm set of values. I couldn't define what it was that motivated him as a character.
Right.
That was one of the things that bothered me.
Something else
And
that bothered me personally too, also, is that it felt like there really weren't many stakes in the movie. Like
oh
they're
yeah,
just like because like Black Panther's never in any particular danger because of his vibranium suit and everything. So it's just like there's not really much here that I'm there's no doesn't seem like there's any particular risk to the hero here. There's more
yeah,
risk to his subordinates than there are to he himself. It doesn't engage
right.
me in the same way.
There's more risk to his claim to the throne
Yeah.
than to him personally.
Right.
um, yeah, that was a bit odd. Like I said, it felt like there just wasn't, like his motivations weren't clearly defined. He didn't seem to have sort of a outside of some nebulous, family and country sort of,
Mm-hmm.
value set. There wasn't anything that you knew what Captain America stood for.
Yeah.
Like that was clearly defined, and it's been sort of um, in every movie that he's in. You see that in just the things that he says and the way that he acts and what he stands up for and what he fights against. Um, and you just didn't get that with Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
And I really expected more, for that character because he had been depicted as, like this. He, he was capable of standing against the Avengers. Like
Right.
you just expect more from that character than what you got in that movie. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of slower paced because it was trying to build that character, even though all the time they spent building him didn't actually accomplish much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know, like the CGI I thought was cheesy.
Ooh, yeah, the CGI. That was another. There was another issue there. I mean, most of the CGI was respectable, but there were just times where just like say the rhinos that's just like okay, this is dragging me right out of the movie. I'm just gonna stop watching the
Yeah.
rhinos and watch everything
There
else
were
behind them.
several times when you would be watching Black Panther and you knew you were watching CGI,
Mm-hmm.
and it completely ruins that scene.
It reminds
Like,
me of a what was it, a short conversation in a Facebook comment section, and we were talking, and Nathaniel was commenting, and we were talking about that sort of thing, and how like CGI when you use like big CGI moments, it's always the most persuasive in scenes where you have no like human experience to kind of
mhm,
base it off of. So
right.
that's why I
Yeah.
say like having like a big CGI space battle in Star Wars works. It's because we've never seen a space battle. We don't
Mhm,
know how a space battle works, so it doesn't like completely it doesn't completely destroy our suspension of disbelief to
right.
see a big space battle in Star Wars because you know what this might be how it could look, or like we like there's like no real world equivalent to it
Yeah.
that drags us out of it. Whereas a rhino charging someone, there is 100% a real world equivalent to us understanding what this should
Yeah.
look like.
You have a frame of reference for that.
Yes, frame of
and
reference.
and so yeah, then it really becomes I kind of got pulled out of that whole fight between him and Killmonger where the train was
Hmm.
coming through.
Yeah.
I was just, yeah, I was like, wow,
And
okay.
that fight also doesn't really seem to work just because it's like they're only vulnerable for this very small window. Otherwise, they're just exchanging punches when they're not really hurting each other. And it's just like,
Which brings us to one of the plot holes that I absolutely don't get. I mean, everything about him and his kingdom and his super suit and his powers, it all comes back to this meteorite.
yeah, the vibranium meteor.
And okay, so maybe they can make cool stuff out of that. But how is it that the entire population suddenly becomes like 250% smarter and just knows how to make all this crap?
Well, I mean it's years of development because the vibranium meteorite. I think what did it say? It fell like 60,000 years beforehand, and then people came onto the scene and they found it, and then they started messing
It's
with
just,
it.
to me, it kind of felt like a bit of, you know, sort of magic hand wavium, except everything was just, oh, it's science. It's
Yeah.
science. Anytime somebody asks a question about how is this possible, oh, it's science.
Well, I mean,
Don't you science, bro?
I mean, there's a small niggling detail that bothers me in that regard. In that, Wakanda is this highly advanced society, hidden from the rest of the world. But why in the world does their capital look like a space version of Nairobi? Because it still looks crowded and dirty, except for the fact that there's a few like like a few random like futuristic buildings around and some hover buses and stuff. But otherwise, it's like it's just space Kenya. It doesn't look any more advanced. It just looks like they slapped a couple of random buildings here and that's about it.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
if
look,
I was
things
gonna
are
see
flying.
it's like if you're gonna see like a futuristic city, I would expect it to look like say San Francisco in Star Trek, or Coruscant in Star Wars, or London in Mass Effect. I'm not gonna expect it to look like Nairobi, Kenya. Which honestly brings me to kind of one of the things that kind of really bothers me about the movie, and that is like it's like the way the movie's almost like it's almost vaguely offensive, the way it kind of frames Africa and Africans and everything, and that it plays off of stereotypes so heavily, it's not even funny,
Yeah.
like hence why the city looks like I say Space Nairobi, it's because it's like, oh, this is an African city, so obviously it's going to look kind of crowded and a little bit dirty, but let's just put some futuristic stuff in here. Yeah, that's an African city. It's like, Did anyone think this through? Um, because I don't know. I think like a hyper advanced black society would look like a hyper advanced society. Period. Not like a hy-
Exactly. That's what I wanted your opinion on because I'm thinking, why are they relying so heavily on stereotypes? If they're really that advanced and if
Mhm.
they can, genuinely just sort of explain everything as like, oh, it's science, we've got this all figured out. Why is it then still so stereotypical?
Mhm.
Why hasn't it actually advanced? That
Yeah.
was that sort of, created some cognitive dissonance.
Um. And I that
Oh,
yeah, I heard. No, I heard. It's like what? No, but no. At the other point I was actually going to make in that regard, in that vein, actually, just fled my mind entirely. Um, because there was another thing about there's another thing about that whole about like, oh yeah, like why? But but there's other things like why are they using spears and so forth? Like why not use more futuristic looking weapons? Because
hmm,
again, the idea of them because the idea of not using melee weapons in general is that we moved away from that. If you have a ranged weapon, the ranged weapon is naturally going to be superior to the melee weapon. So why would
right,
you have spears and swords still rather than advancing away from those and using whatever energy weapons or like plasma encased you know kinetic energy weapons or whatever you want to go with in that regard.
right.
But instead they're still using traditional African weaponry.
Yeah. I I also couldn't really figure out the motivation of the country itself. Um, because there is this internal conflict about do we use our resources and our skill set and help other African people who are being, treated abominably?
Hmm.
Um, or do we just sort of isolate ourselves and keep it all for us?
Right, and
Um,
what is their motivation for isolating themselves like that?
right.
Right,
Why do that?
what
I
is the
mean,
governing principle behind that?
I understand that they were framing it as, oh, this could be used for nefarious purposes because when Killmonger was in control, suddenly he was going to export all of these weapons. But the fact remains that weapons were not the only things that they could produce. They had the technology to heal people almost instantaneously.
Hmm.
You know,
They had
why
flying
wouldn't
machines. They had hyper fast magnetic trains and
right? And why is like the black sheep, so to speak, this woman who's trying to help, other women who've been kidnapped.
hmm
Like, how is that bad? And why are you against it? I
yeah.
don't understand.
I mean, heck, it might have just been, it could have pretty easily been explained because first of all, what we needed probably is a little bit of a history lesson of the time period between when Wakanda was founded and the modern day, to find out like how long it took Wakanda to like develop all of its like all of its really advanced technology, like the
Mhm.
little cloaking system that protects the city from being seen
Right.
and so forth. Like getting a little bit of that would have helped because if they only like developed it in like the last 200 years or so, it's entirely reasonable that maybe they just didn't want all that stuff. They didn't want the vibranium and all the advanced technology to fall into the hands of the colonizers, and other civilizations. We're about to get into that, by the way, because that also
Oh,
bothers me.
yeah. That's
But
another thing. Like they kept Martin Freeman's character in that. I can't think of his name.
Ross,
Uh, but they just kept kind of like throwing shade at him, like dumb
mm-hmm.
white guy,
And it's
shut
just
up, colonizer.
and I almost felt bad because like it's like I almost feel bad because in a movie with primarily black characters, my favorite was the white guy.
I
I
mean,
liked Agent Ross the most because he was actually kind of interesting and amusing.
right. And I don't understand the need to tear down someone else just to make them sort of look better by comparison.
And that's my primary issue with the movie is the fact that Wakandans have this incredibly Western view, like incredibly Western, black Western view of the world. Like everything they say and everything they and the way they act and everything, it's like it all has like this weird, this weird university collegiate understanding of the world, of how blacks view the world. And it
Yeah.
treats blacks like they're this huge, like this, like 2 billion people across the world are this huge monolith, and they're all universally being oppressed no matter where they are in the world.
Right.
And it's just completely it's just completely over the top and doesn't really make any sense. And it's like, why would Wakandans think this, and why does anyone think this? It's like there's nothing there for me to latch onto personally.
Yeah.
um
Like you said, it's very stereotypically African and yet with an extremely Western mindset.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why do they think this way? And calling like white people colonizers or anything, it's like white people never colonized Wakanda. So, as far as we know,
Right.
anyway. Again, there's this.
Exactly.
Again, here's this thing where it's like we could use a bit of history lesson. Maybe there were like British or French or whoever, in the fringes of Wakanda or something. Who knows? We so certainly don't, and so we can only go on the assumption that Wakanda was never actually conquered by anyone from Europe or Asia or anything. Um,
It's starting to feel like our conversation about Star Wars, where there's just too many unanswered questions. You know, like
mhm.
if you could come up with explanations for this, but you would have to do a whole lot of, what ifing.
Stretching. You have to create a whole bunch of headcanons to kind of fill in the gaps. And that's unfortunate too, because in a lot of ways, I was thinking actually, like, this kind of reminds me of how I felt about The Last Jedi. I mean, The Last Jedi, I'm not gonna lie, made me feel worse just because I care about Star Wars more than the MCU. But at the same time, it's like one of those things where it's like a lot of the same issues are kind of cropping up here, where some of the
Right,
big plot holes are making me notice a lot of the smaller plot holes in here.
right. And one of the big ones, there was a lot of I saw a lot of um, what's a lot of people connected with Killmonger, especially because what he said at the end, where he didn't want to live in captivity. You could just throw him in the ocean with his
Yeah.
ancestors or whatever. And so people were like, "Oh wow, that's just such a strong character," and you like feel like you can relate to him or whatever.
Hmm.
And when I watched it, I'm thinking his dad was Wakandan and was on like this secret mission in the
Yeah.
States. How were his relatives thrown into the ocean or
Hmm.
enslaved? I
Like first,
don't
like
get
first of
it.
all, that statement's not going to resonate with Wakandans at all, because that doesn't reflect the Wakandan experience whatsoever. And two, it's like, Killmonger, you've never been enslaved in your life. In fact, you are able to go out and embrace your life and do whatever you wanted to, and you did that by killing everything in sight.
Exactly. Yeah.
But like, you're literally able to do anything in the world, and no one ever stopped you. And it's just like, but you're talking like you lived in the 17th century, and it's just like
Yeah.
18th
And
century
and
even.
his major sort of the thing that changed him and shaped him as a child was that his dad was killed by other Wakandans.
Yes, the previous Black Panther, in fact.
Right. So, how then is that the fault of the colonizers? I
Hmm.
am lost.
Yep.
I expected so much more from that movie, and I was just left with a whole lot of huh.
Yeah,
Um,
it just ended up being so not
and
creative, but it's
so
but
I was fully like ready to accept that maybe there's just some things I don't understand because I'm white, and I need someone else's opinion about this who's not totally in the bag for Black Panther because whatever.
mhm.
Um,
I don't know. Like, again, in a lot of ways, I can kind of understand the whole hype train, especially among black people,
oh
about the
yeah,
about the movie, because there aren't
and it was kind of fun to watch.
because again, there aren't a lot of super mainstream films out there that have primarily black casts and so forth. a lot of the like a lot of black movies fly under the radar in that regard because, well, that's the
Yeah. Well, I
crap.
mean, you have like
Because
Tyler Perry and, you know,
hmm and that's about it, and even then, a lot of the a lot of the ones that a lot of people do know, like say Blade and so forth, kind of more kind of more pushed towards the line of cult classics rather than like a, rather than a proper mainstream film, proper mainstream event,
mhm.
in cinematic history and whatnot. So in that regard, yeah, I can actually understand it. It's just I kind of wish the film wasn't quite so mediocre. you know.
I honestly, I had more fun watching like the people who were excited to go to the theater
hmm
than the movie itself.
Yeah. Yeah, like the film definitely was more fun though. It was definitely fun. It definitely was engaging in its own way. I just wish there was a little. I just wish even not which wish there was a little more to latch onto in it.
Yeah. Well, okay, so identity. And I was thinking, you were talking about becoming more aware of things as you get older and experience more life. And I'm wondering too, like how much of that is experience and how much of it relates to the fact that we're constantly being told to look for these things. Because there are things that I noticed as a woman that, previously I might have thought, well, that person's just an absolute ass. And, I wouldn't have considered it to be a sexist attack necessarily.
hmm
And now I kind of see sexism in things. And I don't know how much of that is that I'm just, you know, kind of old enough to put a name to it now, or whether it's the fact that it is constantly being, pushed in this narrative that everything's sexist, racist, blah, 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 blah. And so then you notice it.
Well, in my honest opinion, I think that it's definitely the cultural shift. This cultural shift to turn everything into sexist attacks and to racist attacks and everything. And I think that even for people like us who are hyper attentive to these sorts of things, it's even it's like even slowly over time, kind of shifting our own perspectives and making us more willing to see things where there actually might not be anything to see at all.
Hmm.
And I'll say definitely in that regard, like I can understand like people like I can better understand like the black experience in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I'm still very very resistant to calling things racist just because it happens to disfavor a black person.
Right.
Like
It's, my boss has this way of looking at things. Like when people come in and you have like that horrible customer that's just going to attack you for everything and everything's your fault. Um, she always says, they're just unhappy in life right now and they're taking it out on you.
hmm
And I think a lot of what we see as racism, sexism, or whatever other ism is are people like that who are just unhappy, and whatever they can readily identify about you, they will attack that.
right.
And it's sort of like a projection of that unhappiness that, they want other people to be miserable because they're miserable. Um, but, identity is such just a huge, you know, such a huge deal. Like everything boils down to identity now. And it's strange in a way, especially, when you talk about sexual identity,
hmm
because how is the most notable thing about you who you want to have sex with? How is
Well,
that important aspect of you as a human being?
well, I guess that's the whole. I guess that's the whole issue with identity, generally speaking, and that like over time, like we're kind of almost in a way moderating our positions a little bit when it comes to identity and how people identify. But then they're on the opposite extreme. No, that's actually not where I was going with that thought. Because where I was actually going with that thought, I'm going to try this again. Where I was actually going with this thought is that when it comes to sexual identity and so forth, a huge part of the problem is the way our society has shifted away from kind of like from making all from making our like who we are and how people view us being mostly merit based to being kind of based entirely around kind of what we are. whether we're
Yeah.
black or we're Asian or we're white, and how we choose to live our lives, rather than but how we choose to live our lives being based on like lifestyle choices, like whether we choose to be gay or not, and so forth.
Right.
Um,
It really, the problem is that we assign virtue to the what as opposed to the who
yeah,
or the character itself, you know?
and that's definitely where the underlying problem comes in, and definitely why like the LGBT community is definitely like doing the wrong thing in this regard, because you can tell if you really listen to them and you watch them and so forth, that so closely identifying with their sexuality is really just applying a band-aid over like a much bigger wound in their in
Hmm.
themselves.
Right.
Like this is in a lot of ways for them it really is legitimately all they have, like all they have as a person, because they never took the time to kind of define themselves in any other way.
Right.
And this is definitely partially a societal issue, because the leftist elements of society in particular have pushed for this for years. And when you're told that being gay is a vitally important part of who you are, it ultimately starts to become a vitally important part of who you are,
Right.
because that's the only way you're told to frame the world. And the same thing applies to being black. If the only thing, if all you're being told is that being black is the most important part of who you are, is a vitally important part of who you are, then you're invariably going to start identifying with blackness rather than any other part of you. And that
Right.
also explains why black liberals and gay liberals and so forth can view conservative blacks and conservative gays, all up and down the gamut, as traitors, is because we don't identify ourselves according to those metrics. We identify ourselves according to what our value is, honestly, in more important realms, in what we can produce and how we help others, and how we raise our families and so forth. Because we have that better grounding.
Yeah.
That's why they feel like they can attack us, because we don't apply the same logic, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Excuse me, sorry.
Do you think that you can take it from here? I have an appointment and I have to run.
Yeah, I mean, I can pretty much just wrap it up at this point, because we did have a very long and complex
I
talk.
think that there was a little bit more that we could have gotten into as far as identity and how identity shaped your worldview.
Yep,
Um, but maybe next time.
maybe next time. Anyway, you get going. Let me set it
Okay.
back up, so
All
that
right.
my face is the only thing on the screen.
Bye then.
Activate that. Okay, you can. There you go. There you go. Webcam. You were very, very good and professional for me. That didn't make any sense. Anyway, yes, she did have an appointment. We've been having a lot of trouble actually trying to record this episode, just because things kept coming up during the week, and it just kept like pushing off the show until we're finally recording on Friday. But yeah, I mean, there's not much more I can add. We've already said it. We've already said, I think, mostly what needs to be said. So I am just basically going to cap off the show here. On the other hand, she did get me to watch a movie, watch one of the movies, and I probably should start pushing my way through the MCU and try to give reactions to it now that it's now that the whole plot line is basically finished, with Infinity War. But we shall see. But I guess I will say this. I will say this to kind of cap off the conversation, and that is, well, I do personally better understand identity and how leftists view identity with time. I don't really agree with the notion at all, and that's very obvious. I don't agree with the notion at all. But it is very frustrating to see. It is very frustrating to see kind of how leftist ideals and conceptualizations of what identity is and how one should identify, is really hurting a lot of people, and that really is frustrating. It's frustrating to see that, because it makes people kind of embrace things they should, and makes them embrace unhealthy aspects of their life, and it also makes them embrace mediocre things just because it happens to be black, hence Black Panther. Black Panther on the whole is a kind of a mediocre movie. but it's being treated like it's the holy grail of the black experience. But it's like, no, it's not. Could you choose a better standard bearer for what constitutes like a nerdy black movie, or could we make a better standard bearer for what constitutes like a geeky black movie? But if we have to, we'll pick up this conversation next week if there's anything else that comes to mind. We'll see what next week entails, frankly. For the past few weeks, we've actually had like not like necessarily deep complex planning for the show, but we've had ideas and rubrics. As of course, 2 weeks ago we had John Delarose, and last week we talked about Star Wars, and this week we talked about identity. And it might be a little more free form going forward again, but we shall see. I have an idea for at least one more show that's going to be a little more complex and a little bit deeper and darker, even. But that's not any time in the near future. That'll be at least like 2 or 3 weeks out from now. So anyway, I want to thank you all for watching this episode of Nerd Rage. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check the links in the description below to keep up with the things that we do on the internet. And we will catch you next week for more conversations on things. We'll see. Because I have no idea. Because like I said, I don't know what we're going to be talking about. But it'll definitely be something. Until next week, everybody.